The wheat was a special concern of the ruling class, although the types are not exactly the same, but basically are made into bread, porridge, and pastry. Black bread was the most common staple food at the time, but don't think that the bread at the time was almost the same as what we eat now. The two are not the same thing at all. The bread we eat now will also add sugar and butter during fairing. The bread is not only soft and delicious, but also very sweet. But the black bread at the time was more like a non-stick pastry, both dry and hard to bite. It was usually made by grinding black wheat into flour, then mixing a large amount of puff pastry. As for the yeast, which was only eaten by the aristocrats that time, don't think about poor people thinking, because this kind of black bread is baked directly on the furnace. So heat without balance, roasting is a normal thing. If the bread is well made, don't see it carefully. It is not much different from coal. This bread, except for the protection, the biggest advantage is that it is hard. It can even be used as a weapon. This is not a joke, it's history. In the European editorial history, it recorded a lot of bandits' robbery but die with black bread. There are even couples fighting, wife killed her husband by hand with black bread. It can be seen that the hardness of this black bread. Even today, some European bread still has the hardness characteristic, such as Russian big necks and the French big rounds. It's a thing of the past. The black bread we just talked about in the Middle Ages is actually considered a masterpiece. At that time, there were a lot of black bread makers who, in order to save money, would deliberately add a little woodworm to the production of some small pebbles and sand and so on. For this hard bread has added a lot of killing power. When the people take such a bread to kill the intruders, they must be grateful to the baker. This black bread is really a must-have tool for home travel and fire prevention. As for the taste of this thing, it can only be said that it is a food that everyone can imagine. Speaking of which, I suddenly remembered a novel with a middle century background, Wolf and New Spice. The male protagonist, Lawrence, is on a trip. If there is a condition, he will never eat black bread directly. It's all about breaking this thing and boiling porridge. Just because it's too hard, the pork smells in the heart of the pig's door, and the poem by Du Fu is also suitable for middle-aged Europe. At that time, the common people could only eat hard and dry black bread and be careful to cut your teeth. But the European nobles can enjoy fluffy and soft white bread made from fine white flour. This white bread, produced by fermentation. It is also called the gift of the meditation in the Middle Ages, translated as the sacred and exquisite bread. At the beginning, this kind of white bread is a tribute to the Church of the Holy Spirit. But soon, the nobles broke this restriction. However, stewing white bread is a bit of a luxury for many nobles, so they will mix some puff pastry in the wheat flour. Although the taste will be a little worse, it must be much stronger than black bread. In addition, in normal circumstances, this kind of bread is eaten and made on the spot. The kitchen will not store a lot. If there is really an important festival or a guest comes to the house, let the cook sieve this mixed flour. The more honourable the guest is, the less puff pastry content. The more honourable the guest is, the less puff pastry content. In addition, according to historical records, in Europe in the Middle Ages, in addition to black and white bread, there was also a kind of super luxury queen bread that kings had to eat in turn. There is also a saying called queen bread. It is a kind of delicate flour with honey, eggs, and vanilla. Mix it with milk and then ferment it with beer yeast. Finally, it is baked into a bread. Someone has tried this recipe. It is said to be more similar to the modern taste of bread. It would even be better because there was no additive at the time. The ingredients were pure green, no pollution. It is said that making such bread needed more than 10 people to sift the flour. It was difficult to get a fire to bake the oven. Only the best baker could win his job. The nobility were also eagerly waiting for the king to invite them to the banquet because of the empress's bread. Now the civilians basically have no chance to contact them for a lifetime. There is a historical record about the Middle Ages in Europe, Shuji Zai. It's hard for them to get the top guys. Bread is also made by burning wood, But not everyone knows how to bake, so it's not easy to see the bread in the bowl. All they have to do is mix some coarsely processed wheat flour with hot water and make it into a paste. When lucky, they can add a few wild vegetables and then boil them together. There were not many meat products, and basically there were only 4 types of pork, chicken, lamb, and fish. The cow was the main labor force in the field, and basically it would not appear on the dining table. Although there are a lot of forests in Europe, there are some wild animals like wild boars and wild rabbits. Hunting is prohibited by the Salt Order because the forest belongs to the noble lord. One of the wild animals is a property that cannot be violated by the lord. Even some civilians enter the forest to pick up firewood will also be driven away by the lord, let alone hunting. In the case of a commoner being found breaking into a forest, the lord would cut off his hand to show mercy. In addition to some religious reasons, the fish became the main source of protein for human. In the Middle Ages, according to religious rules, Christians were forbidden to eat meat for a third of the year, including eggs and dairy products. It's more exaggerated. Some birds living by the water are also classified as fish. Dominants will also try to satisfy their appetites. For example, to make fish into meat, ham. Find an empty shell and add almond milk and fish eggs. A fake egg was born. In addition, with the development of the social economy, some new rich people in Europe hoped to break the existing class barrier to get better food. But the social class of Europe in the Middle Ages is very strict. You'll always think a little bit, what's wrong with you? You just keep hanging. How much? A little bit what? Don't go that. Do you have something? I didn't hear them. How much? Time on the jeans? How you doing? You're okay, and it'll hold. It's time to do it. What's going on? Give me your phone, and I'll go to work with you. I'm not thinking about it. So the new rich class wants to get better food, which is a challenge to the existing system. This immediately aroused the opposition of the nobles. They immediately issued a decree to clarify the food that each class can eat, to limit the new rich class to fight for the food of the nobles. The nobles believe that the poor can only use the thicker, cheaper food, which is also the reason why the food of the poor is very monotonous. So in the food culture of the Middle Ages, Europe was both limited by religion and controlled by class differences.